And who knows, if it was not for such a time as this that you became queen? Esther 4:14. Have you ever wondered why you are where you are? Have you ever felt that your ordinary life may hide an extraordinary purpose? Have you ever had the feeling that God put you in a place at a time in a situation for a reason that you still don't understand? If so, then this story is for you. Today we're going to dive into the story of a simple woman, a young orphan, living in a hostile world, but who was chosen to change the course of history. Esther. Her story is more than just an old tale. It is a reflection of what God still does today, using unlikely people in impossible situations to fulfill unchangeable plans. Get ready to find out how God works even in silence, how courage can overcome fear, and how your place, your voice, your story can be the key to the deliverance of many. This is Esther's story, and it could be yours too. The historical setting: imagine the world more than 2,500 years ago. A time when empires rose and fell as easily as a wave breaks in the sea. We are at the height of the Persian Empire, the largest empire on earth to date. Ruled by Xerxes I, also known in the Bible as Ahasuerus, this empire was a colossus that stretched from present-day Pakistan to Egypt. 127 provinces, hundreds of peoples, hundreds of languages, a gigantic diversity, controlled by one throne. Xerxes was heir to the throne of Darius, grandson of Cyrus the Great, the king who had allowed the Jews to return to their homeland after the Babylonian exile. But many Jews did not return. They were scattered across nations, trying to rebuild their lives in strange places, among pagan cultures, different beliefs and laws that did not favor their faith. It is in this context that the story of Esther begins. Persepolis, Susa, and the royal palace. The capital where most of the book takes place is Susa, one of the royal residences of Persia, a true architectural paradise of antiquity. Imagine grand columns, immense halls with hand-embroidered Persian carpets, hanging gardens, golden halls, all built with the aim of reflecting the absolute power of the king. The feasts at the palace lasted for months. The luxury was so exaggerated that in only one of the celebrations recorded in the Book of Esther did the guests drink from golden cups, each one different from the other. Marble walls, linen upholstery, mosaic floors. It was like being in a dream for those who were welcomed, but for those who were foreigners, like the Jews. The atmosphere was one of constant tension. They were not full citizens, they were tolerated. They lived in a fragile balance, always at the mercy of the king's mood, or the wickedness of some official Jews in exile, a faith under pressure many. Jews were in Susa, and among them lived Mordecai of the tribe of Benjamin, a descendant of men who had been taken captive by Nebuchadnezzar. He was faithful to his origins. He kept his faith, even in the midst of a completely opposite culture. It was in this environment that a young Jewish woman also lived, still unknown to history, but who would soon become queen of an empire and an instrument of salvation for her people. The Book of Esther is one of the only books in the Bible where God's name is not mentioned once. No prayers are recorded, no prophets appear, no heavenly voices echo, but divine providence is in every comma, in every detail, in every decision. This absence of an explicit God is an invitation for us to see how God also acts behind the scenes, in politics, in everyday life, in the history of kings, and in the choices of ordinary people. Maybe you are living in a phase today where God seems absent. You pray, and heaven is silent. You wait, and nothing changes. You seek direction, and find no answers. But Esther shows us that God's silence is not absence. It is strategy, it is preparation, it is invisible action. The same God who led the movement of an entire empire to save his people is the God who can move heaven and earth for you. He doesn't have to shout to be present. Sometimes he's acting just when you think everything is standing still. The stage is set, a vast empire, a powerful king, a people under threat, and a young woman who doesn't yet know the grand role she is about to take on. Esther's story does not begin with a miracle. It begins with a quiet preparation, and it is in this silence that God speaks loudest. Who was Esther before becoming queen? Esther was invisible. Before living in the palace, she lived in silence. And before becoming the protagonist of a liberation, she was just another exile. Her Hebrew name was Hadassah, which means myrtle, a plant common in the Middle East. The myrtle is not a majestic tree, nor does it produce remarkable fruit. But when crushed, it releases a sweet, soothing scent. Such was Esther, seemingly ordinary, but with a hidden purpose that would only reveal itself under pressure. An orphan in a strange land, Esther was an orphan. We do not know how she lost her parents, nor at what age. The text only tells us that she was raised by her cousin, Mordecai, a righteous man who loved God and his Jewish heritage. Imagine the scenario: a young woman without a father or mother, living as a foreigner in a land dominated by another culture, another religion, another language, without rights, without status, without a future in human eyes. But in the eyes of God, she was a queen in the making. The relationship with Mordecai was not just Esther's tutor. He was an example, a man of integrity, faithful to his faith even within a pagan system. He did not bow down to idols. He did not hide his identity. And this, no doubt, profoundly influenced Esther's faith. Mordecai was like that wise relative who shapes us without having to raise his voice. He didn't know it, but he was creating the woman who would change the history of his people. What about you? Who has been the Mordecai in your life? Or has God called you to be a Mordecai for someone? The name Esther, double. Identity in biblical culture. Names carry prophetic significance. Esther is also called Hadassah, her Hebrew name, but living in the Persian context, she is given the name Esther, which comes from Ishtar, a pagan goddess, and also resembles the Persian word for star. Two names, two identities, a constant dilemma. Have you ever experienced this? Being someone in front of others, but feeling that inside you there is something deeper, truer, more connected to your purpose. Esther lived in this conflict. Jewish by origin, Persian by appearance. But her true identity was not defined by the name she bore, but by the calling God had placed upon her. Esther teaches us that your origin does not determine your destiny. You can come from nothing and be called to anything. You may have started in neglect and end up in royalty. You may be anonymous and yet be known in the heavens. It doesn't matter if people don't know who you are. God knows, and He knows where to put you at the right time, in the right way. How often do we feel like Esther, lost between two worlds, trying to please everyone, trying to hide our weaknesses, thinking that because we are small, we cannot make an impact? But listen to this carefully. God doesn't need you to be great. He just needs you to say yes. Because when an orphan's yes meets a king's plan, the miracle happens. Esther didn't know it yet, but her silence was about to become a voice. Her simplicity would be her difference, and the place where she thought she would only survive would become the stage for her calling. Sometimes God doesn't start with promises. He starts with losses. But each loss of Esther was a step toward something greater. Because those who walk with God may even start out invisible, but end up as a light before the nations. The disobedient queen and the royal contest. The book of Esther does not begin with Esther. It starts with a woman saying no. Her name was Vashti, queen of the most powerful empire on earth at the time. A beautiful, influential woman. And surprisingly, brave. Ahasuerus' great banquet. The chapter begins with a spectacle of ostentation. King Xerxes, or Ahasuerus, as he is called in the Bible, organizes a banquet that lasts 180 days, 6 whole months of displaying his glory, his treasures, his wealth, his servants, his military power. It was more than a party. It was political propaganda. And at the end of these months, the king holds a 7-day banquet in the palace courtyard. Everything is grand. Drinks served in golden cups, fine linen tapestries, marble columns, gold sofas on multicolored mosaics. It was a clear demonstration that the king was supreme. But then, he makes a strange decision. He sends for Queen Vashti, so that she can come and wear her royal crown in front of the guests. It sounds simple, but many scholars believe that this invitation was about more than just showing off her beauty. It had overtones of public humiliation. Some even suggest that she would have to appear wearing only her crown, or at least in an indecent manner. Vashti's refusal, and Vashti refuses. She says no. She refuses to be used as a trophy. And in that moment, she goes down in history as the woman who lost everything, but kept her dignity. The Bible doesn't judge her. She simply leaves the scene, and this makes room for God's movement. The throne is empty. The king is furious. And, advised by his officials, he removes Vashti from the throne. She will no longer be queen, because, according to them, if the queen disobeys the king, all the wives in the empire will also begin to disobey their husbands. The structural machismo of the time comes into play to preserve male control. But what seemed to be just a marital crisis was in fact the beginning of the divine plan. God did not cause Vashti's rebellion, but used the situation to make room for his chosen one. The queen's contest. The king becomes depressed. After a while, the servants suggest, "Let us gather the most beautiful young women in the empire, and the one who pleases the king the most will become the new queen." Imagine this. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, of women coming from every province in the empire. Young women of all colors, cultures, accents, religions, all brought to the palace for a selection process that lasts an entire year. Yes, 12 months of preparation before seeing the king, 6 months with myrrh oil, months with oriental perfumes and beauty treatments. They learned etiquette, how to behave before the king, how to walk, talk, seduce. It was more than a beauty contest. It was an image construction, a forced transformation to please a pagan throne. The contrast with Esther, and then Esther enters the story. She is taken to the palace with the other girls. She didn't ask to be there. She didn't dream of royalty. She didn't prepare for this moment, but she had something that no one else had: the grace of God. The Bible says that she pleased everyone who saw her, and the eunuch in charge of preparing the girls gave her special treatment, with the best rooms and food. When the time came for her to present herself to the king, Esther asked for no jewelry or extra clothes. She simply went with whatever the person in charge suggested, and the king loved her more than all other women. She was crowned queen. Esther did not win by strength, nor by appearance. She won because she was aligned with God's timing. She didn't force the door. She didn't seek prominence, she simply answered the call when it came. Sometimes you will be taken to places you did not choose. You will enter into processes you do not understand. But if God is with you, even the place of greatest oppression can become the stage for your mission. God has a special way of promoting His own. He does not choose the most prepared. He prepares the chosen ones. And while the world values appearance, influence, and position, God is looking at the heart. You may be behind the scenes today, but if the timing is right, God will call you to the center of history. The throne is occupied. Esther is now queen, but no one knows her true identity. Not the king, not the other officials, not the enemies of his people. God has positioned her. Now He will begin to reveal the purpose. Haman's plan: every great story needs an antagonist. And in the story of Esther, that role is filled by a cold, ambitious, and dangerously proud man. His name? Haman. Who was Haman? Haman was the kind of person who was not content with being close to power. He wanted to be the power. And over time, he managed to become the most influential man in the empire after the king. The Bible says that the king promoted him above all the other princes and ordered everyone to bow down to him as he passed by. But there was one man who refused to bow. Mordecai, wounded pride. Imagine the scene. Haman walks through the palace gates with his entourage, dressed in luxurious clothes, nose held high, eyes alert to the respect others owed him. Everyone prostrates themselves. Everyone. Except one. Mordecai remains standing, unwavering, true to his faith, because a pious Jew does not bow down before men, much less before a declared enemy of his people. And here comes a detail that many ignore. Haman was a descendant of Agag, king of the Amalekites, the same ones who were mortal enemies of Israel for generations. In other words, the conflict between him and Mordecai, it was not just political, it was spiritual, historical, ancestral. Haman's pride turns to violent hatred, and like every heart corrupted by pride, he exaggerates. He doesn't just want to kill Mordecai, he wants to exterminate the entire Jewish people. The decree of death. Haman hatches a cruel plan. He casts lots, called pur, to determine the date of the massacre. Then he goes to the king and convinces him with a sneaky argument. There is a people scattered among the peoples of your kingdom. Their laws are different. They do not obey the king. It is not in the king's interest to tolerate them. And then he offers a fortune in silver to finance the genocide. The king, perhaps distracted or unconcerned, hands his royal ring to Haman. With it, the decree becomes official. On a certain day, all the Jews in the empire must be killed. Men, women, children. No chance of defense. No mercy. The decree is sealed. The letters are sent. And the date of death is announced. The power of silent evil. See how evil works. It doesn't start with shouting. It starts with wounded pride, with an unresolved offense, with a heart that needs to feel superior. Haman is the portrait of every evil system that seeks to erase the identity of a people. He is the spirit of the Antichrist, who tries to eliminate God's plan through persecution. And here, once again, the heavens seem silent. There is no immediate intervention. There is no angel with a flaming sword. There is no prophetic voice, just silence and fear. The reaction of the Jewish people. When Mordecai reads the decree, he tears his clothes, covers himself with sackcloth and ashes, and begins to weep publicly. Wherever the news spreads, Jews fast, weep, and cry out. It was a death sentence. But not just a physical death. It was an attempt to annihilate God's promise. If the Jews were exterminated, the lineage of the Messiah would end. The plan of salvation would be cut off. Behind Haman's conspiracy was the finger of the spiritual enemy, but above it was the sovereign hand of God. Maybe you've already experienced this. You received a decree that seemed definitive. Bad news, a medical report, a betrayal, a threat that knocked you off your feet. It seems like it's been sealed. It seems like it's too late. It seems like there's no going back. But here is a biblical and eternal truth. The decree of men may be powerful, but God's plan is immutable. Even when all seems lost, God still has the last word. Haman thinks he has won. He is safe in his palace, satisfied with the ring on his hand, confident in the death of his enemies. But he forgot one detail. There was still a queen, and she was Jewish. And while the enemy celebrates, God was already moving the pieces. The call to courage. There are times in life when everything seems to collapse, when we feel like we've reached our limit, when there's nothing more we can do, and yet we're called to do something. That's what happened to Esther. The decree reaches the heart of the palace. The decree of death had been spread throughout all the provinces. But in the palace, surrounded by gold, perfumes, and servants, Esther still knew nothing. It was Mordecai who informed her, through a messenger. He sent a copy of the decree, told her about the people's fast, and made a request. Go to the king. Beg for mercy. Defend your people. Mordecai's request, it was harder than it looks. Esther knew that by Persian law, no one could appear before the king without being summoned, not even the queen. The punishment for such an act? Death. The only exception was if the king extended the golden scepter, signaling clemency. And to make matters worse, Esther confesses, "It's been 30 days since he called me." In other words, the king was not interested. The connection had cooled. She had no assurance that she would be accepted, and then she hesitates. Fear enters the scene. Esther is afraid, and she has every right to be, because what was at stake was not just his position, it was his life. And here's a profound point. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is what you do even when you're afraid. Esther had not yet decided. Then Mordecai responded with the most impactful words in the entire story. Do not think that because you are in the palace you will escape. If you remain silent now, deliverance will come from another place. But who knows? Perhaps you were not made queen for such a time as this? Esther 4:13-14. Esther's turnaround. These words turned the key in Esther's heart. She understood that he was not in the palace by chance, that his position was not a privilege, but a mission. That if she did not speak, God would use another, but she would miss the purpose. Then she answers, "Go. Gather all the Jews who are in Susa. Fast for me. 3 days, 3 nights. Neither I nor my maids will eat or drink. After that I will go in before the king, even though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." These words seal the fate of the story. The moment of decision. We will all have a time like this in our lives. A moment where God calls us to leave our comfort, our silence, our security, and challenges us to take a stand. Perhaps defend someone who is being oppressed, take up a calling, confront an injustice, make a decision that scares you. The problem is that we often expect God to use us without taking risks. We want to be part of the mission, without leaving our comfort zone. But true courage comes when we understand that purpose is worth more than fear. Esther could have remained silent, but silence is also a choice, and sometimes it is the worst choice. What is your time? You may be experiencing exactly this right now, a call to act, a nudge from the Spirit saying it's time, but fear paralyzes you. So receive this as a word from God for you today. You are not where you are by chance. Your story is not random. The place where God put you is the same place where He wants to use you. And maybe, just maybe, you were called for such a time as this. Esther decides to act, but before facing the king, she faces heaven. She enters into a fast. She humbles herself. She seeks the strength that was not in her, but in God. And then, after 3 days, the young orphan, the hidden queen, the unlikely woman, he stands up and walks towards the throne. The strategy banquet, the third day of fasting arrives. Spiritual silence turns into movement. Now it is time to act. Esther stands up, but she doesn't just get up. She doesn't go to the king like a desperate woman. She doesn't run through the palace, corridors screaming for help. She dresses in her royal robes. She stands as if she knows who she is. The meeting with the king. Esther walks into the inner courtyard of the palace. The king is sitting on his throne facing the entrance. All eyes are on her. No one knows what will happen. Esther risks her own life. One false step, one wrong expression, and she could be executed right there. But the king sees her, and something in his heart moves. He extends the golden scepter, a sign of grace, a sign of acceptance, a sign that God's plan is in motion. Wisdom instead of impulse. The king asks, "What do you want, Queen Esther? What is your request? Up to half the kingdom I will give you." This is where many would expect her to scream, "My people will die. Haman is plotting against us." But no, Esther doesn't act with emotion. She acts wisely. "If it pleases the king, come today with Haman to a banquet I have prepared." A banquet. Yes. She invites the king and the enemy to a meal. Why did Esther act like that? Because not every war is won with force. Some are won with strategy, with spiritual sensitivity, with time, with wisdom. The first banquet in the same day, the king and Haman attend the banquet. Imagine the scene, a richly set table. Wine served in carved glasses, fruit, meat, bread, all prepared by the hands of a queen on a mission. During the banquet, the king asks again, "What is your request, Esther? What do you want?" And once again, she puts it off. "If it pleases the king, come tomorrow with Haman to another banquet. Then I will reveal my request." The power of right timing. Here we learn one of life's greatest wisdom lessons, knowing how to wait for the right moment. Not every yes is for now. Not every revelation is for today. Not every decision should be rushed. Esther felt that it was not yet time. Something still needed to happen. Something was still being moved by God, and indeed, that night would be the turning point in history. While God works behind the scenes, that same night, the king cannot sleep. And he orders the official records of the kingdom to be brought to him for him to read. Look at the detail. Among all the forms of insomnia, he decides to read royal minutes, and there, he finds something curious. He discovers that Mordecai had saved his life years before by reporting a conspiracy. But for some reason, he was never rewarded. Coincidence? No. Providence. While Esther prepared the second banquet, God prepared the scene for the turnaround. Active patience. Maybe you are experiencing the first banquet. You have already taken your stand. You have already fasted. You have already prayed. You have already come before the king, but you haven't received the answer yet. Know this: God's silence is not a refusal. Sometimes it is a strategy. He is lining up behind the scenes. He is stirring. Hearts, thrones, decrees that you don't even know exist. Be like Esther, wait wisely. And when God says now, make your request boldly. The first banquet ends. The invitation to the second is extended. And the enemy, Haman, leaves the palace feeling invincible. Little does he know that while he celebrates, the sky has already decreed the fall. Because whoever walks with God, even when waiting, is never still. The turnaround. The night passed. Haman slept peacefully with his ego inflated. Esther slept in silence with a firm heart. The king hardly slept. But what no one knew was that the invisible God of Israel was completely active. The king's insomnia. When God takes away the sleep of the powerful, that night, as we saw in the previous chapter, the king could not sleep, and instead of looking for distractions, he asked to read the official records of the kingdom. Who reads minutes in the middle of the night when they are sleepless? Only those who are moved by God. And there it was recorded that some time ago, Mordecai had saved the king's life by denouncing 2 officers who were conspiring to assassinate him. The king then asks, "What was done to honor this man?" Servant's response, "Nothing, Your Majesty." Nothing? Someone saves the king's life and gets no reward? This oversight, which seemed like just a bureaucratic detail, now became part of the divine plot. Haman arrives at the palace with other plans while the king was thinking about how to honor Mordecai. Haman arrived at the palace early with another purpose in mind. He wanted to order Mordecai's execution. Yes, the man who had just been remembered as a hero. Haman wanted to hang from the gallows he himself had built, a structure over 65 feet high, erected in his own house. But before Haman could speak, the king called out to him, "Haman, what should be done for the man whom the king delights to honor?" Haman thinks it's about him, with his ego inflated and his pride blind. Haman thinks, who else would the king wish to honor besides me? So he devises the most luxurious honor plan possible. This man must wear royal robes and ride on the king's horse with the royal crown on his head. And one of the most important nobles must lead him through the streets saying, "This is what is done to the man whom the king delights to honor." The king listens and responds, "Excellent. Go immediately." And do all this with Mordecai, the Jew. Do not omit any detail. Take that pride. Haman's humiliation. Haman the proud now finds himself leading his greatest enemy through the streets, publicly declaring the honor he so desired for himself. Imagine his face. Imagine the looks on people's faces. Imagine Mordecai, standing, firm, being recognized in front of everyone. This is divine justice in action. Simple, direct, impossible to contain. God changes history in one night, a forgotten detail, an unexpected insomnia, a bureaucratic reading, a plan of honor. God didn't need lightning, thunder, or earthquakes. He just moved ordinary situations for eternal purposes. You could be one night away from your breakthrough. You could be one detail away from the favor that will change everything. Trust. Heaven has not forgotten you. Practical application. God honors those who remain faithful. Mordecai remained steadfast. He did not seek revenge. He did not try to exalt himself. He was simply faithful, even in anonymity, even when he was not remembered. And at the right time, God honored him publicly. And if you have been living this time of waiting, if you have done good and received silence, if you have served God and felt forgotten, don't be discouraged. Those who sow in tears will reap with joy. Psalm 126:5. Haman returns home humiliated. Mordecai returns to the palace gate, exactly where he has always been. But now all of heaven knows who he is. And as the day draws to a close, Esther's second banquet approaches. Haman thinks he can still convince the king, but he doesn't know that very night, his downfall has already been sealed, or the God who honors his children also strikes down those who rise up against them. The fall of Haman. Esther's second banquet begins. The king is curious, Haman uncomfortable, Esther as firm as ever. She had fasted, she had waited, she had prayed, and now the time for revelation had come. The second banquet, sitting at the table, the atmosphere seems calm, but the spiritual tension is palpable. The king once again looks at Esther and asks, "What is your request, Queen Esther? What do you desire? Up to half the kingdom, it will be granted." Esther takes a deep breath. It's time to speak. There is no more room for silence. Now it's time to reveal the truth. Esther reveals her identity. "If I have found favor with the king, I ask that my life and the lives of my people be given to me. For we have been sold to destruction, annihilation, and death." Imagine the king's surprise. Esther is talking about herself. She is revealing herself as a Jew, a people who had been marked for death. Until that moment, the king did not know that the woman he had crowned as queen was part of the people Haman wanted to destroy. And then he asks, "Who is this? Where is the man who dared to do such a thing?" Esther points out, "This man Haman." The queen stands up and points to the enemy sitting in front of her. This man, the adversary and enemy, Haman. The entire palace trembles. Haman stands paralyzed. The king gets up in a rage and goes out into the garden, and Haman, desperate, begs for his life. Haman's despair, he throws himself on the couch where Esther is reclining. But when he returns to the hall, the king sees the scene and shouts, "Does he want to force the queen in front of me in the palace itself?" The sentence was sealed. Haman will not just be punished, he will be eliminated. The gallows prepared. For oneself, at that moment, one of the king's servants says, "Your Majesty, there is a gallows over 65 feet high in Haman's house. He has prepared it for Mordecai." And the king orders, "Hang him on it." The same instrument of death he prepared for the righteous now becomes his own sentence. God's justice never fails. This moment is so powerful that it echoes one of the greatest spiritual truths in the Bible. Whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. Galatians 6:7. Haman sowed pride, manipulation, hatred, persecution, and he reaped judgment, shame, and destruction. God may take his time, but he never fails. The righteous may seem forgotten, but their cause is never abandoned, and the enemy may even sit at the table, but he will not remain there for long. The answer comes. How many times have you seen someone act like Haman? People manipulating behind the scenes, people oppressing the righteous, people promoting injustice, and appearing to win. But hear this with faith. No force formed against you will be effective. No plan of the enemy will prosper. Because the God who sees everything is also the God who defends his own. Haman dies in his own trap. The queen is now honored. The king begins to see through the hidden plots. And Mordecai will be exalted even higher. But the fight is not over yet. The enemy has been defeated. But the decree of death is still in force. And now, what to do? The victory of God's people, Haman, was dead. But the problem had not yet been solved, because the royal decree was still in force. In Persia, no decree signed with the king's seal could be revoked. It was like an eternal law, immutable, irreversible. Other words, even with Haman out of the way, the day of the massacre against the Jews was still set. The enemies were still ready. The weapons had already been sharpened, and fear still took hold of their hearts. The new decree. Then Esther presents herself again before the king. But now she is no longer shy, no longer hesitant. She speaks with authority, with tears, yes, but also with conviction. How can I bear to see the destruction of my people? How can I bear to see the disgrace of my family? The king understands, and he answers, Haman is dead, but you, Mordecai and Esther, can write another decree in my name as you see fit. The enemy tried to seal the end, but God delivered the pen into the hands of the righteous. Mordecai's counter. Decree Mordecai, now appointed Prime Minister of the Empire, writes a new decree. Jews have the right to defend themselves. In any city or province, if they are attacked, they can fight back. They can unite. They can fight. And they need no longer fear. The letters were sealed with the king's ring. Royal knights crossed the empire carrying the new message. The sentence had not been annulled, but it was faced with authority. The appointed day arrives. The 13th day of the month of Adar arrived, the day the Jews would be exterminated. But instead of fear, there was hope. Instead of silence, there was clamor. Instead of passivity, and there was unity. And when the enemies tried to attack them, the Jews were prepared. They stood up, they united, and they won. God transforms the decree. What was supposed to be a day of pain became a day of victory. God did not erase the decree. He reversed the effect. Sometimes what seems unchangeable in your life doesn't need to be destroyed. It just needs to be transformed by God's presence. God can transform. Divorce under reconstruction, bankruptcy and testimony, the loss in renewal, pain, into power. The Feast of Purim is created so that this victory would never be forgotten. Mordecai and Esther instituted a new celebration, the Feast of Purim. Purim comes from Pur, which means lot. Remember the lots cast by Haman to mark the day of destruction? Now that name became a memory of God's faithfulness. During the Feast of Purim, the Jews gathered, they ate together, exchanged gifts, helped the poor, and told the story of salvation. It was a way of saying, the enemy tried to erase us, but God made us celebrate. Your story can become Purim. Maybe you are living your month of Adar, the month where everything seemed lost, where the bad news arrived, where the decree was signed. But believe this, God still transforms stories. He still rewrites destinies. He still sends new decrees, and what today is a reason for tears can become a reason for celebration. The people were saved. The promise was preserved. The Messiah would continue to come. And all this because an ordinary woman said yes to the call. Because a righteous man did not bow down. Because heaven still rules over earth. The victory of God's people is not just survival. It is redemption. It is celebration. It is transformation. And Purim, it's proof that God always has the last word. The story has come to an end, but Esther's message lives on, and perhaps more relevant than ever, one woman, one people, one purpose. Esther began the story as a young orphan, no name, no status, no expectations, but God put her exactly where she needed to be, at the right time, in the right position, with the right words. And because of their courage, a people were saved, a promise was preserved, and an enemy was defeated. She was not spared from the conflict, but she was sustained in the midst of it. Spiritual reflections for your heart. The story of Esther teaches us lessons that span the centuries and directly touch our souls today. God uses ordinary people for eternal purposes. You don't have to be famous, eloquent, or influential. You just have to be available. 2. God's silence is not absence, it is providence. Even when he doesn't appear visibly, he is behind the scenes, lining everything up. Every position has a purpose. You are where you are for a reason. At your psyche, job, in your family, in your circle, you are the light in that place. Fear is real, but so is courage. Courage is saying yes, even when you're trembling inside. Esther was afraid, but she didn't run away from the call. The enemy may try, but God always wins. Haman seemed to have the power, the ring, the decree, the allies. But in the end, heaven has the final say. What about you? What is your time like this? Maybe you are going through a time when you feel like everything is about to fall apart. Maybe you feel like you have no strength, that you have no influence, that you are alone. But maybe, just maybe, you were called for just such a time as this. Don't run away from the call. Don't underestimate your position. Don't silence your voice. If I perish, I perish. With this phrase, Esther gave up her life, and God gave her back her mission. Practical application for the listener today. God is raising up new Esthers. You're men and women who take a stand, who don't give in, who use their influence, small or large, to fulfill God's purpose on earth. So reflect, who can you protect? Who can you influence? Who can you encourage? You don't need a crown. You just need to say, here I am. This was the story of Esther. A story of faith, courage, and destiny. Of a God who does not appear directly, but who never stops acting. If this message touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Subscribe to the channel for more uplifting stories, and leave a comment below. Lord, use me in the time given to me, because yes, you were also called for a time like this.